Hey guys, it's Jen over at jenscrappypages.blogspot.com, and this is today's project. I used watercolor pencils with watercolor paper, and in a way that was new to me, but maybe not to you, but if it is, I hope you learned something from it. It was kind of fun. The supplies that I used to create this card are actually very minimal. I did use some Whisper White Baker's Twine, a basic black archival stamp pad, the Big on Birthdays stamp set, and some watercolor pencils, and I have a little watercolor brush that I got. Well, it's just a little paintbrush. So that's it for supplies. And then for my card, I have a 4 1/4 by 11 piece of Whisper White cardstock. For this one, I had the Melon Mambo, but I used up my very last sheet for this project, so I'm improvising. So 4 1/4 by 11 for my card base, and then a scrap for our watercolor, and a 2 7/8 by 4 3/8 piece. My Melon Mambo is a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then a 1/2 by 2 3/4. My watercolor paper is 2 3/4 by 4 1/4 and 5 by 4 by 5 1/4. So let me rewind. So my watercolor paper is 4 by 5 1/4 and 2 3/4 by 4 1/4. So let's get started with let's start with this piece first, and then we'll go on to this one. So this is where, I think I'm going to set this on that side of the screen so it's still in there. This is where our scrap piece of paper is going to come in handy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just scribble out my watercolor pencils onto this scrap. And what I used was the Melon Mambo. And you want enough to be able to do your project. I might have to do this twice. So I'm just going to scribble and put a nice layer of my Melon Mambo on here. And then I'm going to do the same with my Daffodil Delight and my Pumpkin Pie. Alright, so now that that is done, that's when the magic happens. So I have my little glass of water here, and I'm going to just dip my brush in here, and I'm going to transfer our color from what we just scribbled on, and we're going to transfer it over here. And I'm going to go, I don't know, maybe within 1/4 of an inch of the edges of my paper. And then we're just going to kind of keep picking up color as we go. So this doesn't have to be exact, and if you want a little bit more color, you can lay down more on it. And then we're going to do the same with our Pumpkin Pie and our Daffodil Delight. And that's all we need for this particular piece here. And be careful, I ended up getting a little bit of color on my finger and got it at the top, but that wiped off okay. So now we're going to set that aside to dry, and we're going to do the exact same thing with this piece, but we're going to go all the way to the edges. So I'm just going to bring another piece of paper underneath so I don't get it on my work surface. So you're going to go ahead and you're still going to pick up your color just like you did before. Okay, so this piece I'm going to set aside also to dry, and I think I'm just going to run my dryer on this to make it a little bit faster. You do want to make sure that when you're working with this piece, because we're going to be stamping on it, that you want to make sure that it's completely dry before we stamp on it. Ask me how I know. So before I stamp the sentiment, I did want to mention quick, the reason I did it this way, where I colored on my paper first and then on my watercolor paper, was because for some reason, you know, when I scribble it on, to my actual piece, sometimes I was unable to completely get that scribbling look. So I still had pencil marks, and I didn't want pencil marks. I wanted it to look watercolored. So that's why I chose to do this. The other tip I will say is this was just a piece of regular Whisper White cardstock that I used as my scrap. And this was the first time I did it actually on the Whisper White. Normally, the times before that I did this, I did it on another piece of watercolor paper, which I would recommend because I don't feel like I got as much color off of this as I would have gotten off of the watercolor paper, because this just kind of soaked in that water and held on to the color more so than the watercolor paper when I scribble it on. So just note to self. So then what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put on this little strip, and then I'll just kind of base where I put my sentiment based on where I put this strip. And that's going to go probably about maybe a half of an inch up from the top, or up from the bottom of that. And that's just going to get put right down here. I'm going to try and straighten this out a little bit so I have a more flat surface to work with when I stamp on it. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my stamp, and I'm going to make sure that this is inked up really good. You want a nice layer of ink on there, because sometimes it has a harder time transferring onto the watercolor paper than it does regular. So just make sure it's inked up really nice, and then you're going to want to hold it down fairly firmly. So I'm going to bring this down here and hopefully get this all lined up. And then you just want to make sure you press really nice. Be careful not to move the stamp, because that will make your sentiment. So hopefully this is good enough. And it's okay. I mean, it's definitely not as good as this. And maybe that's because my stamp pad needs a little bit more re-ink, or it's not as juicy as the one that I used with this one. So that's that. And then we're just going to go ahead, and that is going to, not yet, we're going to wrap a little bit of twine around it and tie a bow. So let's get there it is. Figure out where that is, and we're just going to wrap it around the back here, and I'm just going to wrap it around a couple different times. So we'll attach it here, and then give it a couple times around, and then I'm just going to secure that to the back, and then come back around, put my dimensional see, no, I didn't do that. Okay, so it's been a few days since it's been almost a week since I've made this project. So I'm just going to go ahead and get some adhesive down here, and then I'm going to stick that on top of our Whisper White, which is just 1/8 of an inch bigger, just for a little hint of white to come out behind that. And then we're going to take our dimensional elements and throw those on the back. And that is going to go just in the center here, lining up all of your colors. So you just want a little bit peeking out from all of the sides. Isn't that cool? I think that's really neat. And that's just going to get adhered onto our Melon Mambo cardstock. The other thing I kind of found I struggled with a little bit, and I don't know if you can tell, but my adhesive doesn't really want to stick to that watercolor paper. It's not as friendly with my adhesive. But it does work. You just have to put a little bit more on to get it to stick to it. And then I'm going to go ahead and throw that on my card base. You know, it's funny because this is how I used to always make my cards. I would always have a base that I would put it on. And when I moved over to Stampin' Up, I started just using the cardstock as my base. So we'll just throw this on. And I haven't forgotten about the bow, I promise. But I thought I would get everything secured down and do my little bow at the very last. And if you guys noticed, I did not use my Wink of Stella. There's no sparkles on here. I just thought it was pretty without. So we're just going to take this twine and make a little tiny bow from it. And then we'll be done. So this twine has a mind of its own. But there's the bow. And there's the card. It didn't take too long to put together. It's pretty simple. So thank you so much for watching today. I hope you learned a little something new. And I did as well. I now know that when I scribble on my watercolor pencils, to do it on the watercolor paper instead of just a regular cardstock, or even like a piece of printer paper, I don't think would work either. So thanks again for watching. If you would like instructions for this or dimensions, they will be on my blog, jenscrappypages.blogspot.com. But if you would like to recreate the technique, it'd probably be best to come back to the video. Talk to you later. Have a good day. Bye.